Greta Keller hit the mud hard, her tools scattering across the street, while half of Red Hollow laughed. A grown man had shoved a lone woman into the dirt, and not one soul stepped forward because she was foreign. She was alone, and the whole town had already decided she was nothing. She rose anyway, gathered her hammer with bleeding fingers. Then a shadow fell over her, and a low voice said the words that would silence every mouth on that street. If you believe worth is built, not given, subscribe and stay with me to the very end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, so I can see how far Greta's story travels tonight. The stagecoach didn't slow. It rolled through Red Hollow in a fit of dust and rattling wood, and the driver flung Greta Keller's trunk off the back before the wheels had even stopped turning. "End of the line, miss," he called, and he didn't look back. The trunk struck the dirt and split its latch. Her tools spilled a chisel, a plain 3 files wrapped in oilcloth, a handsaw with a birchwood handle her father had carved before she was born. They lay in the street like something spat out. Greta stood over them a long moment. She did not cry. She had learned on the crossing over that crying got a person nothing but sore eyes and less water. "You dropped your knittin' sweetheart," a man drawled from the livery porch. There were 4 of them there in the shade cards laid out on a barrel between them. The one who'd spoken had a mustache gone yellow at the corners, and a way of looking at a woman like she was a horse he might or might not buy. Greta knelt and began gathering her tools. She wiped each one on her skirt before she set it back in the trunk. Slow, careful, the way her father had taught her. "I'm looking for work," she said. Her voice came out even though the accent bent every word. "Honest work. On a ranch or a build. I am a joiner. A carpenter." The men laughed. All 4 of them at once, like she'd told a joke. "A carpenter," the yellow mustache man repeated. He stood hitched, his belt came down off the porch. "You hear that Amos' little foreign gal says she's a carpenter?" "I heard it, Silas," said Amos, who did not stand. "What is funny?" Greta said. It wasn't a question. She kept wiping her chisel. "What's funny," Silas said, "is you standing here in a busted dress with your pa's tools, thinking any man in this territory's gonna put a hammer in a woman's hand. Where you from, honey? You talk like you got rocks in your mouth." "Bremen," Greta said. "Germany, Germany." Silas grinned at the others. "We got ourselves a genuine German. Come all this way to fix our roofs." He crouched down in front of her uninvited, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on him at 10 in the morning. "Tell you what. You want work, I got work. My missus needs her wash done. 2 bits a load. That's about the top of your trade, ma'am." "I do not wash clothes for money," Greta said. "I build. I have built stables, a church door, a staircase that turns. A staircase that turns." Silas laughed again, and this time he reached out and flicked the brim of her bonnet, knocked it crooked. "You hear this one, boys. She built a church door." Greta caught the bonnet before it fell, set it right, kept her eyes down on her work because she had learned that too, that a man like this wanted your eyes so he could feel large in them, and she would not give him that. "Don't got much to say now, do you?" Silas said. "I have said what I came to say," Greta answered. "I am looking for work. If you have none, I will ask elsewhere." "Elsewhere." Silas straightened. Something in his voice had gone flat, the humor draining out of it the way weather turns. "Little girl, there ain't an elsewhere in Red Hollow that's gonna take you. This here's my town. My brother owns the freight. My cousin runs the mercantile. And I'm telling you, ain't a decent man for 40 miles gonna hire a woman who wanders in off a stage with no husband, no kin, no letter, and a story about turning staircases." He nudged her trunk with his boot. Not hard, just enough. "So you can wash or you can climb back on the next coach. That's the whole menu." "There is no next coach until Thursday," Greta said. "I asked the driver." "Then I reckon it's gonna be a long few days for you, ain't it?" She looked up at him then, just once, just long enough to say, "I have had longer." And it was the wrong thing to say, or the right thing said to the wrong man, because Silas's face changed. He didn't like being answered. Men like Silas never did. "Get up," he said. "I am nearly finished." "I said get up out of my street. It is not your street. It belongs to—" He shoved her. It wasn't a large thing, a palm to the shoulder, but she was crouched and off her balance, and she went down sideways into the mud where the water trough had overflowed, and her hand came down on the split lid of her trunk, and the wood took the skin off 2 of her knuckles. The men on the porch laughed. That was the part Greta would remember later when she was old, and the ranch had a name and a brand, and 40 head with her mark burned into their hides. Not the shove. The laughter. Grown men in the shade watching another man knock a woman into the mud and finding it good sport. She got her hand up out of the dirt and looked at it. The blood was already welling, mixing with the mud running pink down her wrist. "Now say sorry," Silas said, "and I'll help you wash up. See, I'm a Christian man." Greta did not say sorry. She reached instead for her handsaw, which had landed a foot from her knee, the birchwood one, her father's. And she picked it up, and she did not raise it, did not threaten with it, only held it against her chest, the way another woman might hold a child. And she began slowly to rise. "You aimin' to cut me, foreign gal?" Silas's hand dropped to the pistol on his hip. "Go on. Try it. See how fast this town buries a stranger." "I am not going to cut you," Greta said. Her voice shook now, not with fear, with something colder. "I am going to stand up, and you are going to let me, because a man who pushes a woman into the mud in front of his friends is not a man. He is a boy who was never taught, and I am too tired to teach him today." The porch went quiet. Silas's jaw worked. "What did you say to me?" "You heard her, Silas." The voice came from the far end of the street. Low, unhurried. The kind of voice that did not need to be loud, because it had never once in its life been ignored. Every head turned. He was tall, taller than Silas by a hand, and he came down the middle of the street leading a big dun horse by the reins, in no rush at all, the sun behind him and the dust rising around his boots. His hat was low. His shirt was gray with old sweat and mountain work. There was a 2-day beard on him, and a stillness to him that made even the flies seem to slow down. "Rowan," Amos said from the porch, and he said it quiet, the way a man says a word he'd rather not have to. "Caleb Rowan," Silas said, and he took his hand off his pistol, and that told Greta everything she needed to know about who this man was. "This ain't your business." "Woman's bleedin' in the street," Caleb Rowan said. He didn't stop walking until he was close. "Reckon that's every man's business who calls himself one." "She's a stranger, foreign, come in here givin' lip." "She's sittin' in the mud," Caleb said, "'cause a fella twice her size put her there. That the version you gonna tell it in church Sunday, Silas?" He tied his horse to the rail, slow, deliberate. A man who did not do anything fast, because he had never in his life needed to. "Or you want to try the true one?" Silas said nothing. Caleb crouched down in front of Greta. Not close the way Silas had been close. He kept his distance the way a man does with a spooked animal or a person who's been handled rough and might not know yet that he means no harm. "Ma'am," he said, and touched the brim of his hat, "you hurt bad." Greta looked at him. She was still holding the saw against her chest. "It is my hand," she said. "It is not deep." "That your pa's saw?" She blinked. "How do you—" "Handles carved by somebody who loved you. Man don't carve a handle like that for money." Caleb nodded at it, and something passed over his face, quick gone before she could read it. "Good steel. German." "Yes," Greta said, surprised. "Solingen steel. My father." "Best there is." Caleb stood, and he put out his hand. Not to take the saw. To help her up. "Come on out of the mud, miss. Ground ain't done you any favors today." She looked at the hand a long moment. It was a large hand, scarred across the knuckles, one finger crooked where it had been broke and set wrong. A working hand. She had learned to read hands the way some women read faces, and this one told her the man had never in his life asked another soul to do what he wouldn't. She took it. He pulled her up easy and let go the second she had her feet, and stepped back to give her room, and that too Greta noticed. "Now then," Caleb said, turning to the porch, and his voice hadn't changed at all. Still low, still slow, but there was iron under it now. "Somebody want to tell me what a carpenter's doing, sitting in the mud in Red Hollow, while 4 grown men watch and laugh." "She claims she's a carpenter," Silas said. "She claims it." Caleb looked at the split trunk. At the tools laid careful in their oilcloth. At the plane, the files, the chisels worn down at the edges from years of a hand that used them right. He crouched again and picked up the chisel, turned it in the light, ran his thumb along the edge, careful the way only a man who knew tools would. "Huh," he said. "What?" Silas said. "Silas. Edge is honed to about 15 degrees. Steady. No chatter marks on the bevel." Caleb set the chisel down exactly where he'd found it. "That ain't a woman playing dress-up Silas. That's somebody who's put 10,000 hours behind a bench." He looked up at Greta. "How long you been at the trade, miss?" "Since I was 9, Greta said. "My father had no sons. He taught me instead. He said—" She stopped. "Said what?" She lifted her chin. "He said God does not care whose hands do the work, only that it is done true." For a moment, Caleb Rowan just looked at her. And in the whole street, the porch, the mercantile, the 2 women who'd stopped their marketing to watch the boy holding the reins of a mule, in that whole street, nobody made a sound. Then Caleb bent, gathered her tools himself one by one, laid them back in the trunk with a care that no man in that town had ever shown her. He closed the lid over the broken latch. He hefted the trunk up onto his shoulder like it weighed nothing. "Rowan," Silas said, and his voice had gone thin. "What in hell you doing?" "I got a roof needs finishing before the rains," Caleb said. "Barn roof. 20 feet of ridge, half the rafters green, and I'm one man." He settled the trunk on his shoulder. "I've been 3 weeks looking for somebody who knows a purlin from a post. Ain't found one." "You can't hire her." "Can't I?" "She's a woman, Rowan. She's foreign. She's got no people. She's got tools honed to 15 degrees and a saw her daddy carved," Caleb said, "which is more than any man you sent up my mountain this summer could say." He turned to Greta. "Miss, I'll be straight with you, and you can say no, and I'll leave you be. I ain't hiring you 'cause I feel sorry for you. I got no use for sorry. I'm hiring you 'cause I need a roof finished, and you might be the first soul come through here who can do it. Pays $1 a day and a bed in the room over the barn, and it's honest, and I don't touch what ain't mine, and any man on my land learns that fast or he don't stay on it. That's the whole of it." Greta looked at him, then at the porch, then at the mud drying on her sleeve. "Why would you trust a stranger," she said, "when your whole town does not—" "'Cause my whole town," Caleb said, "just stood on a porch and watched a man knock a woman down for the sport of it. I don't set much store by what a town like that trusts." He shifted the trunk. "You comin' or not, Miss Light's burnin'." "You do not even know my name. Reckon you'll tell me on the ride up," Caleb said, "if you're of a mind to, and if you ain't, you can keep it. Man don't need a name to know how somebody keeps their chisels." Silas found his voice one last time. "You take her up that mountain, Rowan, this town's done with you. You hear we stood by you when your wife—" "Don't." Caleb said the one word so soft it was worse than a shout. He did not raise his head. He did not clench a fist. He just went still all over the way the mountain went still before weather. "Don't you finish that, Silas Boone. Not today. Not with her bleedin' 10 feet from you." Silas shut his mouth. Caleb turned back to Greta, and whatever had crossed his face was gone again, buried deep. "Well, miss." Greta Keller looked at this tall, strange, quiet man who had come down the middle of the street and picked up her father's saw like it was worth something. She had crossed an ocean. She had buried her father in Bremen and sold everything but the tools and taken a ship in the belly-deep dark of steerage and a train and 3 stages all to reach a country that had in the space of 1 hour thrown her in the mud and laughed. And here was one man, one holding her trunk on his shoulder, waiting. "Greta," she said. "My name is Greta Keller." "Caleb Rowan." He touched his hat brim again, that same grave old-fashioned courtesy, exactly as he had the first time, like she was a lady and not a foreigner in a muddy dress. "Pleasure, Miss Keller. My horse'll carry your trunk. You'll have to walk till we clear town. I got no second mount. That's set right with you." "I have walked further," Greta said, "for less." Something moved at the corner of Caleb's mouth. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close as the man came. "Reckon you have," he said. They were near out of town, the two of them walking with the dun horse between them and the trunk lashed behind the saddle when the woman stepped off the mercantile porch and into their path. She was broad and gray and dressed in black bombazine, and she planted herself in the road with the certainty of a woman who had never once in her life been told to move. "Caleb Rowan," she said, "you will not do this thing." "Mournin' Mrs. Pruitt? Don't you mournin' me. I knew your mother. God rest her, she'd weep to see it." The woman's eyes cut to Greta up and down, and her lip curled. "A foreign woman, unmarried, living alone on a mountain with a widower. You know what they'll say. You know what they'll call her." "I know what you'll call her, ma'am," Caleb said. "I've heard your Christian charity before. It isn't decent." "Decent." Caleb stopped the horse. He looked down at Mrs. Pruitt from under his hat, and his voice never rose not once, but the whole street could hear it. "Ma'am, I watched a man put this woman in the mud not 20 minutes gone. I watched your husband's card partners laugh about it. I watched you stand on that porch with your basket on your arm and not move 1 inch to help her up. He let that sit. So I reckon you and me got a different notion of what's decent, and I reckon I'll trust mine." Mrs. Pruitt's face went blotchy red. "The girl will ruin you." "The girl's gonna finish my roof," Caleb said, "which is more than this town's done for me since April." He clicked his tongue at the horse. "Step aside, Mrs. Pruitt. You're standing in the sun. Ain't good for a woman your age." She stepped aside. Greta walked past her chin-up mud on her sleeve and did not look at the woman, and did not need to because Mrs. Pruitt's stare was hot as a brand on the side of her face. They walked on. The town fell behind them board by board, until it was just the two of them, and the horse, and the long climbing road, and the mountains, standing blue and patient in the north. Greta was the one who finally spoke. "That woman," she said. "She said widower." Caleb didn't answer right off. He walked 3-4 steps. "She did." "You had a wife?" "I did." Greta let it lie a moment. She knew the shape of that kind of silence. She had carried her own since Bremen. "I am sorry," she said. "I will not ask you of it. A person's grief is his own." Caleb glanced at her sidelong. Something surprised in it, as if he had expected her to pick at the wound, the way people always picked at it. As if her not asking was the strangest thing anyone had done to him in a long while. "'Appreciate that, Miss Keller," he said quietly. They walked. "Your hand's still bleedin'." Greta looked at it. She'd tied it off with a strip torn from her petticoat. "It has stopped. It is nothing. I have had worse from a slipped chisel." "I'll wager you have." A pause. "There's a spring 'bout a mile on. Cold water. We'll wash it proper. Ain't smart to let a cut go dirty up here. Nearest doctor's the one you just left, and he's a drunk who charges by the tooth." Caleb shook his head. "This country'll heal you, or it'll kill you, and it don't much care which. Best not give it the chance." "You speak of it," Greta said, "like it is a person, the country." "It's more honest than most people I know," Caleb said. "It don't lie about what it'll do to you. Town'll smile and rob you. Mountain just tells you plain work or die." He looked out at the ridgeline. "I'll take the mountain." Greta considered that. "In Germany," she said, "my father built for a rich man once, a great house with towers and a room only for books. It took 2 years. When it was done, the rich man said the work was poor and paid my father half. There was nothing my father could do. The man had lawyers. The man had the magistrate to supper on Sundays." She wiped her cut hand absently on her skirt. "My father built that man a house that will stand 300 years, and the man cheated him, and everyone in the town said my father should be grateful for the half. That is why I came here. I was told in America a person is paid for the work, not for the name." Caleb was quiet a moment. "Somebody told you wrong some," he said. "You saw that in the street back there." "Yes, but not all the way wrong." He nodded at the road ahead climbing. "Up there past the ridge it's my land, and on my land the work is the thing. You finish that roof true, you'll get your $1 a day and a straight word from me, and no man'll lay a hand on you. That much I can promise. Down there." He tipped his head back toward town. "I can't promise you nothin'. Down there they'll always see the mud on your sleeve. Up here, I'll see the roof." Greta walked in silence a long moment. "That," she said finally, "is the first fair thing anyone has said to me in this country." "Then I'm sorry it took so long comin'," Caleb said. They stopped at the spring. Caleb held the horse while Greta knelt at the water and washed the mud and blood from her hand, and the cold of it stung and then numbed, and she flexed her fingers and found them all working. "It is fine," she said. "The chisel that made this scar." She showed him an old white line across her palm. "That one I felt for a month. This is nothing." Caleb crouched, dipped his bandana, wrung it out, and held it out to her without a word. She took it and pressed it to the fresh cut. "You'll want it wrapped 'fore you climb any ladders," he said. "Split knuckle on a green rafter 30 feet up ain't a mistake a body makes twice. You have finished many roofs alone." "I've finished everything alone," Caleb said, "for near 4 years." He stood and looked north at the mountains. "Wasn't always that way." Greta wrapped her hand and did not ask. And Caleb Rowan looked at this German woman kneeling at his spring, wrapping her own wound without a whimper. Not asking him the one question every soul in the county always asked. "What happened to your wife, Rowan? What happened up on that mountain?" And something in his chest, some long-locked thing shifted a half-inch. Not open, just loose. "You'll do," he said mostly to himself. "What?" "Nothin'." He gathered the reins. "Long climb yet, Miss Keller. Roof won't wait on us, and neither will the reins." He started the horse up the road, and then without turning. "And for what it's worth, I don't reckon your daddy'd be ashamed. Man that cheated him ought to be. Not him, and not you." Greta stood very still by the spring. She had crossed an ocean and been thrown in the mud and laughed at by 4 men in the shade. She had walked out of that town with her chin up and her heart like a stone. And it was a stranger, a widower with a crooked finger and a 2-day beard and a voice like slow water saying, "Your daddy'd not be ashamed it was that, and only that," that finally put the sting behind her eyes. She blinked it back. She would not cry in front of him. Not on the first day. "Miss Keller." Caleb had stopped, was looking back. "You comin'?" "Yes," Greta said. She picked up the birchwood saw and held it to her chest, the last thing her father's hands had ever touched, and she followed the tall, quiet cowboy up the mountain road, toward the ridge, toward the ranch, toward whatever waited beyond it. "I am coming," she said. And behind them, far down in the valley, Red Hollow watched the 2 figures climb the widower and the foreign girl, and began already in 100 low voices on 100 shaded porches to tell the story wrong. But up on the mountain, the wind came down off the high snow and moved through the pines cold and clean, and it did not care who was foreign and who was not. It only knew the work that a roof would keep out, and the winter that was coming, and the 2 people walking up to meet it. Caleb Rowan slowed his steps without seeming to, so the woman with the split knuckle and the ocean behind her could keep his pace. And Greta Keller walking thought, "I have built a staircase that turns, and a church door, and a rich man's tower. Now I will build something here." She did not yet know what. She did not yet know it would take everything she had. The ranch came into view over the last rise, and Greta stopped walking. "That is the barn," she said. "That's the barn. The roof is open, half of it." "Told you it was," Caleb said. "Why I hired you." Greta set down her tool roll and stood there a long while, and Caleb let her look because he'd learned by now that this German woman looked at a thing the way another person listened to a sermon, like there was something in it that mattered, and she meant to hear all of it. "The rafters on the north side," she said. "They are green. You cut them this spring." "Cut 'em in May. Only wood I had. They will twist as they dry. You see the one the third from the end. It is already pulling. If you nail the sheathing to it now when it turns, it will crack every board." She picked her tool roll back up. "You did well to wait. A man who did not know would have closed it up in June and cursed his roof all winter." Caleb looked at her sidelong. "You can see all that from here." "I can see it from here." Greta started walking again faster now, drawn toward the broken thing, the way some people are drawn toward a fire. "Show me the rest. Show me all of it. The bad first. Always the bad first." So he showed her the bad first. He showed her the corral fence, 3 rails down on the west run, the posts heaved up out of the ground. He showed her the water trough by the well split down one seam, and weeping. He showed her the loft ladder with 2 rungs gone, and the door on the tack room that hung by a single hinge and dragged a groove in the dirt every time it swung. Greta said nothing through all of it. She only touched things, ran her hand along the split in the trough, rocked a heaved fence post with her palm, crouched and looked up under the barn eaves where the light came through. "How long?" Caleb said when she'd gone quiet too long. "For you tell me it can't be saved. Might as well hear it now." Greta straightened up and looked at him like he'd said something foolish. "Can't be saved." She almost laughed. "Mr. Rowan, in Bremen I have seen a house that burned to the cellar rebuilt in a season. This is not a burned house. This is a strong house that a tired man has been fighting alone." She wiped her hands. "The roof I can finish in 11 days if the weather holds. The trough is one afternoon. The fence." She frowned at the west run. "The fence is a different problem. Fence is just posts heaved out. Frost did it." "No." Greta walked to the downed section, crouched, and put her finger to the base of one of the fallen posts. "Frost heaves a post straight up. This post did not heave. This post was cut." She held her finger up. There was a clean, pale scar low on the wood, angled deliberate. "See the mark. That is a saw. A frost does not carry a saw, Mr. Rowan." Caleb went very still. He came and crouched beside her and looked where she was pointing, and Greta watched his face change, watched the tired patience go out of it, and something older and harder come up underneath like a stone surfacing in a plowed field. "Somebody cut my fence," he said. "Somebody cut it low and pushed it and hoped you would blame the frost." Greta stood. "How many cattle do you run?" 41 head. "Why?" "Because a man does not cut a fence to look at it. He cuts a fence to move something through it." She looked out at the open range beyond the broken run. "Or to let something out. Have you counted your cattle this week?" Caleb was already walking to his horse. He was gone 2 hours. Greta did not wait. She unwrapped her tools and set up under the open barn roof and began that very first afternoon to work, because her father had taught her that a person proves nothing with their mouth and everything with their hands, and she meant to have 3 rafters trued and pegged before the man came back. She had 2 of them done when she heard the horse. Caleb rode in hard and swung down before the dun had stopped, and his jaw was set like a man chewing on iron. 38, he said. "You had 41. I had 41 Sunday. I count 'em Sunday every Sunday 4 years running." He tied the horse with a jerk. 3 head gone, and the tracks go straight through your cut fence down the draw toward... He stopped himself. "Toward Pike's range." "Who is Pike?" Caleb didn't answer right off. He walked to the fence, crouched where she'd shown him the saw mark, and stared at it like it had spoken a name to him. "Dawson Pike runs the big outfit down the valley," he said finally. 4,000 acres. He's wanted my summer pass since the day my wife and I bought it. The mountain grass, the high meadow, that's what makes my beef. Come August, every other outfit in this valley's grazing dust, and I'm grazing green. Pike's offered to buy me out 3 summers running. I told him no, 3 summers running." Caleb's hand closed slowly into a fist over the cut post. "Now somebody's cut my fence and run off 3 head, and I'm short-handed, and the town won't so much as sell me nails on credit. Why will the town not sell you nails?" Caleb looked up at her. And there it was again. That shadow, the one that had crossed his face in the street when the woman said widower. "Later," he said. "That's a later thing, Miss Keller." Greta nodded. She did not push. She had her own later things. "Then let us do the now things," she said. "Come, hold this rafter. I have trued it, but I cannot peg it and hold it both, and I will not nail a green rafter to a plate alone, because if it kicks it will take my thumb, and I have grown fond of my thumb. And that, not the mud, not the spring, not the roof, that was the moment Caleb Rowan first almost smiled at her. He came and put his big scarred hands on the rafter and held it dead steady while she drove the peg, and the 2 of them worked in the failing light without another word, and it was, Greta thought, the first easy silence she had shared with another human being since her father died. The trouble started at dawn. Greta was up the ladder at first light, and she'd not been up 10 minutes when she heard the riders. 3 of them coming up the mountain road, not fast, in no hurry at all, the pace of men who want you to see them coming. Caleb came out of the house pulling his shirt on. "Stay up there," he told Greta. "I can climb down. Stay up there and keep working. Let 'em see the roof getting done." He walked out to the yard unhurried and stood loose and empty-handed as the 3 riders came in. Greta stayed on the roof, but she watched. The man in front was heavy through the shoulders, well-dressed for range work, a silver band on his hat. The 2 behind him were the kind of men a rich man keeps. "Rowan," the heavy man said. "Pike." So this was Dawson Pike. Greta drove a nail slow quiet and watched. "Heard you took on help." Pike's eyes went up to the roof to Greta and lingered there in a way that made her want to put the hammer through his teeth. "The German gal. The one Silas Boone says come in off the stage with a story about turnin' staircases." "Silas Boone talks a lot," Caleb said, "for a man who put a woman in the mud and called it Christian." Pike smiled without any warmth in it. "I come up neighborly, Caleb. Heard you lost some cattle. Thought I'd offer to keep an eye on your line, seeing as you're stretched thin. Man alone up here, well. Things happen to a man alone." "Things sure do." Caleb's voice never moved. "Found 3 posts on my west run cut low with a saw. Frost don't carry a saw, Pike. My new hand pointed that out to me. Got a good eye, that one." The silence that came down then was a different kind of silence. Greta felt it from the roof. Pike's smile stayed put, but his eyes went flat. "You accusing me of something, Rowan?" "I'm telling you what a saw mark looks like," Caleb said. "You can make of it what your conscience tells you, if you got one." One of the men behind Pike shifted his hand toward his hip, and Caleb's head turned to him, just turned slow, and the man went still. "Now that's a mistake," Caleb said quietly. "You don't want to finish making sun. Not in my yard, not this morning." For a moment nobody moved, then Pike laughed and lifted his reins. "You're a proud man, Caleb Rowan. Always were. Your wife was proud too. Look how that—" Caleb took one step forward. He did not raise his hand. He did not raise his voice. He took one single step, and Dawson Pike, 4,000 acres, and 2 hired guns behind him, backed his horse up half a length. "Ride off my mountain, Dawson," Caleb said, "and send whoever cut my fence to do it himself next time so I can meet him proper." Pike wheeled his horse. "You got till the first dry storm, Rowan?" he called back over his shoulder. "Then that pass is gonna change hands one way or the other. Man can't hold ground, he can't work. Everybody in this valley knows it." His eyes went up to the roof one last time. "And a foreign gal with a hammer ain't gonna change the arithmetic." They rode off down the mountain. Greta came down the ladder. "That man," she said, "cut your fence and stole your cattle, and he came here to see if you knew." "He came here to see if I'd break," Caleb said. He was watching the road where the dust of them still hung. "He's been waiting 4 years for me to break. Ever since," he stopped. "He'll wait a while longer." "What is the first dry storm?" Caleb looked at her. "You'll know it when it comes," he said. "Dry lightning off the peaks, no rain in it. First one usually hits late July. That's the danger season up here. One strike in the wrong draw, and the whole lower range goes up like a match." His jaw tightened. "And Pike knows my lower fence line's the only thing standing between a grass fire and my whole herd. He cut it once already. Don't reckon he cut it to steal 3 cows. He cut it to practice." Greta felt the cold of that go down her spine. "Then we fixed the fence," she said. "Today. All of it. Every post. You got a roof to finish." "The roof will not burn my cattle," Greta said. "The fence will. First the fence, Mr. Rowan, then the roof. The bad first. Always the bad first." And Caleb Rowan looked at this woman who'd been in his employ not one full day, standing in his yard, telling him the order of his own work, and he did not argue. "The bad first," he said. "All right, get your tools." They fixed fence for 3 days. It was brutal work, worse than the roof hole after hole in ground, packed hard as fired brick, and Greta's hands, which she'd thought were as hard as hands could get, split and bled and hardened further. She did not complain. Caleb noticed that she did not complain, and he noticed that she worked past the point where a hired man would have quit, and he noticed that when she set a post, it went in plumb and stayed plumb, and he found himself on the second day doing a thing he had not done in 4 years. He talked, not much, but some. "My wife's name was Sarah," he said out of nothing, driving a post while Greta held it. He said it the way a man tests ice with one foot. Case you were wondering. Case the town told you their version. Greta kept her hands steady on the post. "I do not listen to the town. She wanted this land. More'n I did at the start. I was gonna go down to Texas, run cattle flat and easy. She's the one saw the mountain. Said the high grass was worth the hard work. Said Caleb a thing that's hard to hold is a thing worth holdin'." He drove the post. Drove it again. She was right about the grass. Best summer range in the territory. Pike's known it since before we bought it. Greta waited. She had learned that a man like this told a story at his own pace, or not at all. "Fever took her," Caleb said. "4th winter. Doctor down in Red Hollow, the drunk one. The one I told you about, he wouldn't come up. Storm on road bad, and I couldn't pay him but half up front." His voice did not change, and that was the worst of it. How it did not change. "So I rode down, and I offered him everything. My horse, my saddle. I got down on the floor of his office, and I offered him my hands. Miss Keller offered to be his hired man till the debt was paid, if he'd just get on a horse and come up my mountain. And he looked at me and he said..." Caleb stopped driving the post. "He said she's likely gone already, Rowan. No sense me risking the road for a dead woman." Greta's hands tightened on the post. "She wasn't gone," Caleb said. "She lasted 2 more days. I dug the grave myself. Frozen ground. Took me most of a day." He picked up the maul again. "Town knew he wouldn't come. Whole town knew, and not one of 'em rode up to help me nurse her, and not one of 'em came to the burying, and then..." His jaw worked. "Then they had the gall to talk. Said I'd let her die up here. Said a man drags a good woman up a mountain, that's what comes of it. Said I was cursed. Been saying it 4 years." He drove the post home with one hard stroke. "So that's why the town won't sell me nails, Miss Keller. Not 'cause of anything I did. 'Cause it's easier for a town to call a man cursed than to look at what it didn't do." Greta let go of the post. It stood plumb and true. "In Bremen," she said quietly, "when my father was cheated of his pay, the town said he should be grateful for half. And I asked my father, I was 15. I asked him, how can they say this when they know it is wrong? And he told me something I did not understand until I was older." She looked at Caleb. "He said a town does not hate the man it wronged. It hates that he reminds it of the wrong. You do not remind them of a curse, Mr. Rowan. You remind them of a doctor who would not ride, and a street full of people who did not come. That is a heavier thing to carry than a curse, so they gave it to you instead." Caleb Rowan stood very still, the maul hanging from his hand. "Nobody ever put it that way," he said. "My father was a wise man," Greta said. "He was cheated by a fool. Both things are true." She picked up her shovel. "Next post." And Caleb, moving to the next hole, felt something he had not felt in 4 years, felt the terrible private weight of Sarah's death shift just slightly from a thing he carried alone toward a thing that one other soul on earth now understood. He did not have a word for what that was. He only knew that when they finished the west run at sundown, he built a fire and cooked for 2 and set a plate in front of Greta Keller without being asked. And it was the first time in 4 years he had cooked for anyone but himself. Greta looked at the plate, then at him. "Thank you," she said. "Ain't much. Beans and side meat." "It is more than I have been given since Bremen," Greta said, and she meant the plate, and she meant more than the plate, and Caleb understood that she meant more than the plate. They ate in the easy silence. The town came for her on the 4th day. Greta was back on the roof, the fence finished, every post plumb, every cut post, replaced with green pine set deep, when she saw the wagon coming up the mountain road. A church wagon, 4 women in it, and a preacher driving, and the broad gray shape of Mrs. Pruitt, in her black bombazine, sitting up front like a figurehead on a ship. "Riders?" Greta called down. Caleb came out, saw the wagon, and something in his shoulders went tired. "That's not riders," he said. "That's worse. That's the Ladies' Aid." They came into the yard and the preacher helped the women down, and Mrs. Pruitt led them across the dirt toward Caleb, with the wagon train's certainty of a woman on the Lord's own errand. "Caleb Rowan," she said, "we have come to speak plainly as Christians." "Ain't seen much Christian from you yet, Mrs. Pruitt, but I'm hopeful." That woman. Mrs. Pruitt's chin lifted toward the roof where Greta had come to the edge and stood with her hammer. "Living up here. Alone. With you. It is a scandal, Caleb. The whole town is talking. Reverend Ames has heard it in 3 counties by now." "Have you, Reverend?" Caleb said. 3 counties. My. News travels for a man who lets a woman die alone up a mountain. Faster'n a doctor, seems like." The preacher had the grace to look at his boots. "We are offering the girl a way out." Mrs. Pruitt pressed on. "There is a position. In Bozeman. A respectable household. She can leave this mountain and this shame, and go where a decent woman belongs in service under a roof with a family and—" "In service," Greta said from the roof. Every head turned up. "You are offering me," Greta said, coming to the ladder, "to be a servant. In a kitchen. In Bozeman." She came down the ladder rung by rung, her hammer still in her hand, and she crossed the yard and stood in front of Mrs. Pruitt, mud on her sleeves and pine pitch on her hands, and her chin high as a church spire. "I am a joiner, ma'am, a carpenter. I have built a staircase that turns and a church door with iron hinges I forged myself. My father taught me since I was 9 years old, and you have driven a wagon up a mountain to offer me a kitchen. It is a respectable position," Mrs. Pruitt said, but her voice had lost some of its wind. "Respectable." Greta turned and pointed her hammer at the barn, at the fence, at the trough she'd mended at the roof, taking shape rafter by rafter against the sky. "I set 31 fence posts in 3 days. I mended a trough that leaked. I have trued 9 rafters, and I will true the rest by Sunday. That is my respect, ma'am. It is in the work. And when I am finished, this barn will stand 100 years, and the man who owns it will keep his cattle through the winter, and children not yet born will shelter horses under a roof that a German woman built with her own 2 hands. She lowered the hammer. "You may keep your kitchen in Bozeman. I have work here." The 4 women behind Mrs. Pruitt were silent. And then a strange thing happened. One of them, the youngest, a thin girl of maybe 20, with a plain, kind face, spoke up. "Is it true?" she said. "You forged the hinges for a church door?" "Ruth," Mrs. Pruitt snapped. "It is true," Greta said. "St. Ansgar's in Bremen. The hinges are shaped like wheat. I can draw them for you if you like." The girl Ruth stared at her with something on her face that had not been there before, something that was almost wonder. "Ruth, the wagon." Mrs. Pruitt seized the girl's arm. "We have done our Christian duty. If the woman chooses shame over decency, that is on her soul, not ours. Reverend." They loaded back into the wagon, but the girl Ruth looked back once, twice, the whole way down the yard, until the road bent and took her out of sight. Caleb came and stood beside Greta as the wagon disappeared. "You made an enemy of Ada Pruitt today," he said. "I already had that enemy," Greta said. "I made her in the street when I would not wash Silas Boone's laundry." She looked at the road. "But the girl, Ruth, her I did not make an enemy of." "No," Caleb said slowly. "No, I don't reckon you did." He looked at Greta with something new in his face, something like the beginning of respect turning into something with no name yet. "You know what you just did? You just gave that town its first crack. Ada Pruitt's been the wall this town hides behind for 20 years, and that girl Ruth just looked over the top of it and saw something on the other side." He shook his head. "Wheat-shaped hinges, Lord." "They are very fine hinges," Greta said, and for the first time since Bremen, there was something almost like humor in her voice. Caleb Rowan looked at her, and this time he did smile, a real one, small and slow, and startled out of him, the first in 4 years. "I'll wager they are," he said. The fence was cut again 5 nights later. Greta heard it a sound in the dark, a rhythmic rasp that she knew in her bones, because she had made that sound 10,000 times herself. The sound of a saw in wood. She was up in the loft room over the barn. She did not wake Caleb. She took her father's saw, the birchwood one, because it was the nearest thing to a weapon she owned, and because holding it made her brave, and she went down the loft ladder in her nightdress and out into the dark, following the sound. She should have woken Caleb. She knew it even as she crept along the fence line. But she had spent 3 days setting these posts with her own bleeding hands, and something in her would not lie in a bed and listen to a man saw them down. She came around the corner of the corral and saw him. One man crouched at the base of a post, a saw working low and quiet, just as she'd guessed, just as she'd told Caleb. And rage went through her clean, cold absolute, and she stepped forward without thinking, and said in the dark in her hard-cornered English, "That is my fence." The man froze. Then he came up fast, whirling, and there was a knife in his hand, and Greta's blood turned to water, but she did not run. She had learned somewhere on the long road from Bremen that running only teaches a man he can chase you. She stood her ground and lifted her father's saw and said louder, "I set that post. 3 days I set these posts, and you will not cut them down." "Foreign witch," the man hissed. He was young, sweating, scared himself. "Get back inside, for I—" "Caleb!" Greta screamed it up. The mountain screamed it with everything in her lungs. "Caleb Rowan!" The man lunged, and the world exploded in sound and light, a rifle shot cracking off the peaks, and the man's knife spun away into the dark, and he fell back, clutching his hand and howling. And Caleb Rowan came out of the dark in his union suit with a rifle and a face like the wrath of God. "Don't you move," Caleb said. He levered another round. "Don't you so much as breathe, Cole Dawkins. I know your voice. I've known it since you were a boy stealing apples off my mother's tree." The young man, Cole Dawkins, knelt in the dirt holding his hand and sobbing. "He made me," he blubbered. "Pike made me. Said he'd call in my daddy's note, said he'd take the farm, my ma's still in it. Mr. Rowan, I didn't have no. You put a knife." Caleb said very slow, very cold, "On this woman. In the dark. In her night clothes." He walked closer. "You want to talk to me about what you didn't have a choice about, Cole? You best not start with that." "I wasn't going to hurt her. I swear to God I just wanted to scare her off." "Get up." Caleb hauled him up by the collar. "You're going to sit in my tack room till sunup, and then you and me are going to ride down to that sheriff, and you're going to tell him about Dawson Pike and the note on your daddy's farm and every fence you ever cut. You hear me?" "He'll kill me," Cole wept. "Pike'll." "Then you should have thought of that," Caleb said, "for you brought a knife up my mountain." He marched the boy toward the tack room. And then he stopped. And he turned. And he looked at Greta standing there in her nightdress in the dark. Her father's saw still raised in both white-knuckled hands, shaking now that it was over, shaking all over. "Miss Keller," he said, and his voice had changed completely, all the iron gone out of it. "You came out here alone, in the dark, with a saw." "It is my fence," Greta said. Her teeth were chattering. "I set the posts. You could have woke me." "There was no time. He was cutting. I could hear him cutting." Caleb stared at her. "You put yourself in front of a man with a knife," he said slowly, "over 3 fence posts." "Not over the posts," Greta said. And she lowered the saw at last and hugged it to her chest and looked at him across the dark yard. "Over the work, my work. I will not lie in a warm bed and let a man destroy my work in the dark. I have let that happen before. My father let it happen. In Bremen, he let the rich man cheat him because there was nothing to be done, and it made him small. It made him old. I watched it break him. And I swore on the ship. Never again would I lie still and let someone take what my hands had made." Her voice cracked. "So I came out, because it is my fence, and I set the posts." Caleb Rowan stood in the dark holding a rifle and a captured man, and looking at this German woman shaking in her nightdress with her dead father's saw clutched to her heart. And something happened in his chest that had not happened in 4 years, and he did not have a name for it, and he was afraid of it, and he could not look away from her. "Go inside," he said, and his voice was rough. "You're froze through. Go on. I got him." "You are certain. Go inside, Greta." It was the first time he had used her Christian name. She heard it land. He heard himself say it. "Please." She went. At the loft ladder she stopped and looked back, and he was still standing there, watching her, the rifle down at his side now, and neither of them said anything, and there was nothing to say, and everything. Cole Dawkins never made it to the sheriff. In the gray before dawn, while Caleb saddled the horses, Greta went to bring the boy water and coffee because she had lain awake all night and thought about it, and decided that a frightened boy with a note on his family's farm was a different thing than a monster, and that her father would have brought him coffee. She opened the tack room door. The window was broke out. The boy was gone. Caleb. He came at a run, looked at the broke window, the empty room that churned dirt outside where a horse had stood in the night. Somebody let him out, Caleb said. He crouched at the window. Or somebody took him out. Look, 2 sets of prints and a shod horse. Boy didn't jump out this window on his own. Somebody came up my mountain in the night and pulled him. He stood, and his face was grim. Pike, cleanin' up. Now there's no witness. No boy to tell the sheriff about the note about who cut the fence. It's my word against a rich man's, and we both know how that arithmetic runs in this valley. Greta stared at the empty room. Then he is gone, she said. The boy. Our only proof. Our only proof, Caleb agreed. He rubbed his jaw. Unless... He stopped. Unless what? Caleb walked back into the tack room, crouched, and from under the cot, half hidden where it had been kicked in the struggle, he pulled out a canvas satchel. The boy dropped his bag, Caleb said. In the night. When they pulled him out the window fast. He opened it. Inside were tools, a saw, a chisel, a pry bar, and folded small at the bottom, a paper. He drew it out, unfolded it, and went still. What is it? Greta said. Caleb held it out to her. It was a map hand-drawn, careful of Caleb's own range. His fence lines, his summer pass. And along the lower fence in a cramped and hurried hand marks, little marks, and a date. July 24th. That's a map of my land, Caleb said quietly. With every place along the lower line marked where the dry brush stands thickest, where a fire'd catch fastest. He looked up at her. And a date, 10 days off. The night of the first dry storm if it comes on schedule, and it always comes on schedule. His hand closed on the paper. This ain't about 3 cows, Greta. It never was. Pike means to burn my whole lower range the night of the storm, blame the lightning, and take the mountain when I got no herd left to work it. Didn't it? The morning light came up gray and cold over the ranch, and Greta Keller looked at the map in Caleb Rowan's shaking hand, the map of the fire that was coming for everything the two of them had built with their bleeding hands these 2 weeks, and she understood that the quiet part was over. 10 days, she said. 10 days. She reached out and took the map from him and held it up to the light, and her carpenter's eye, the eye that read a green rafter and a saw-cut post, and the honing angle of a chisel moved over the marks, slow and steady and cold. Then we have 10 days, Greta said, to be ready for him. And she folded the map and put it in her apron, and picked up her father's saw, and turned toward the barn, where the half-finished roof stood open to the sky, and the whole long summer waited. For 10 days, they did not sleep like people who trusted the world. Greta finished the roof on the 3rd day because a roof over the hay was a roof over the thing that would burn, and she wanted it closed. She worked from dark to dark. Caleb took the fence and the water-cutting brush back from the lower line, dragging the dry stuff away by the wagon load, digging a breakdown the whole length of it with a mule and a plow, while Greta drove the last nails home overhead. You should sleep, Caleb told her on the 4th night. She was still up the ladder by lantern light. You are not sleeping. I'm the fool who owns the place. And I am the fool who is finishing his roof. Greta drove a nail. We are both fools, Mr. Rowan. Let us be fools who are ready. On the 5th day, Caleb rode down to the sheriff. He took the map. He came back with his jaw like iron. He wouldn't hear it, Caleb said, swinging down. Sheriff Tull looked at the map and said a boy could have drawn it. Said without Cole Dawkins to swear to it, it's just paper. Said, his hand tightened on the reins. Said maybe I drew it myself, looking for a reason to shoot at Dawson Pike. Greta stood very still. He said that to you. He said that to me. In his office, with Pike's saddle horse tied out front. Caleb hurled his hat down in the dirt the first time she had ever seen him lose his grip on himself. Pike owns him, owns the sheriff, owns the bank, owns half the notes in this valley. Cole Dawkins is proof of that. Boy's daddy owed the bank, and the bank is Pike, and that's how Pike made a decent farm boy come up here and cut my fence with a knife in his teeth. He picked the hat back up, slapped the dust off it. There's no law up here, Greta. There's just Pike. That's the whole arithmetic. Greta bent and picked a splinter of pine out of her palm. She did it slow to give herself time to think. Then we will not go to the law, she said. We will make the law come to us. How? I do not know yet. She looked at the folded map in Caleb's hand. But a man who plans a fire on paper is a man who writes things down, and a man who writes things down leaves a trail. My father used to say a lie is spoken, but a scheme is recorded. Somewhere, Mr. Rowan, there is a paper that hangs Dawson Pike. The map is not it. The map is only the corner of it. She stood. We have 5 days left. Let me think. She thought for 2 of them. And on the 7th night she came down from the loft where she'd been sitting with the map by candlelight, and she found Caleb at the table cleaning his rifle, and she set the map down in front of him. The date, she said. July 24th. Why does Pike write a date? 'Cause that's when the storm's due. No. Greta sat. A storm does not come on a day, Mr. Rowan. A storm comes when it comes. But Pike wrote a day, a hard day, as if he knows when it will come. She tapped the paper. Because he is not waiting for the storm. He is only pretending to wait for the storm. He will start the fire himself on the 24th, whether the lightning comes or not, and if the lightning happens to come, all the better, he blames the sky. But the date is fixed because his men must be told when. You cannot tell 10 men to be ready when the weather turns. You must give them a night. A muster. Like an army. Caleb set down the rifle. You're saying he's got a crew coming. I am saying a fire that size set along a whole fence line so it catches everywhere at once. One man cannot set that. Cole Dawkins could cut a post. He could not burn a range. Pike will need 6 men, 8 riding the line dropping fire. And those men must be paid and told when and where to gather. Greta leaned in. In Bremen, when a great house was built, my father kept a book. Every man, every day, every coin. Because you cannot run a crew on a promise. Dawson Pike is running a crew, Mr. Rowan. Somewhere he has a book. Caleb stared at her. You want to steal Dawson Pike's ledger? I want to find it, Greta said. Stealing is a different word. But yes. She met his eyes. The map tells the sheriff nothing because a boy could draw a map. But a paybook with Pike's own hand listing the men and the date and the wage for a night's work on your fence line, that is not a thing a boy draws. That is a rope. And even a bought sheriff has to think twice before he ignores a rope. The candle guttered between them. Where'd he keep a thing like that? Caleb said slowly. Where does a rich man keep his most dangerous paper? Greta said. Not in a house where a wife or a servant might find it. Not in a bank where a clerk might read it. She looked at him. You said he owns the bank, but the bank is a public place. No. A man keeps the paper that could hang him close, in his own place, his office, on his own land. His ranch house is 4,000 acres deep with 15 hands on it. Then it is a hard thing, Greta said, but not an impossible thing. Hard is only a number of hours, Mr. Rowan. Impossible is a different word. She sat back. I did not cross an ocean to lose a mountain to a coward with a paybook. Neither did you. Let us go and get it. And Caleb Rowan looked at this German carpenter across his table. This woman who read a scheme the way she read a green rafter, who had turned his 10 days of dread into a plan with corners and edges, and he felt for the second time in his life the thing Sarah had made him feel when she first pointed at the mountain and said that one Caleb the hard one. You're something, Greta Keller, he said quietly. You know that. I am a joiner, Greta said. I fit things together. Men board schemes, it is all joinery. You find where the pieces meet, and you make them true. She stood and gathered the map, and there was a fire in her now that had nothing to do with Pike's fire. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we watch his ranch. We learn his men. And on the 23rd, the night before, while his crew is mustering for the fire, his house will be empty of the men who guard it. That is when we go in. They watched Pike's ranch for 2 days from the high rocks with Caleb's field glass, and Greta counted men the way she counted board feet, patient and exact. And by the second evening, she knew the shape of the place where the hands bunked when they rode out, which windows lit at night and which stayed dark. "The dark window on the east end," she said, lowering the glass. "It is lit only in the evening, and only for an hour, and then it goes dark, and the lamp moves to the bedroom. That is his office. A man works his books after supper and before bed. Every night the same hour. Men are creatures of habit. Mr. Rowan, and a rich man most of all, because no one has ever made him change. And on the 23rd, he rides out with his crew to set the fire the next night, or to be near it to command it. The house empties. The office goes dark. And we go in through the east window, which I have watched, and which has a sash lock that any joiner can turn from outside with a thin blade in under a minute." She set the glass down. "I have opened 100 stuck windows in my life. This is only one more." Caleb looked at her a long moment. "If we're caught on Pike's land," he said, "he don't need the sheriff. He's got 15 men and 4,000 acres, and nobody'd ever find where he buried us. You understand that? This ain't fence cuttin'. This is our lives." "I understand it." "Then why?" Greta was quiet a moment. The wind came down off the peaks. "Because I built your roof," she said finally. "And I set your fence. And you cooked me a plate of beans when no one in this country had given me anything but mud. And I am tired. Mr. Rowan, I am so tired of watching the Silas Boones and the Dawson Pikes of the world take what honest hands have made, while the honest hands are told to be grateful for half." She looked at him. "My father was told to be grateful for half. I will not be. Not again. Not here. Not on this mountain that I have bled into." Caleb Rowan looked at her, and he did not say anything, because there was nothing to say to that, and because the thing he wanted to say, he did not have the words for, and was afraid to find them. "All right," he said. "The 23rd. But the fire did not wait for the 23rd. On the night of the 21st, 3 days early, 2 days before their plan. Before they were ready, the dry storm came. It came the way Caleb had said it would. Dry lightning walking the peaks with no rain in it, cracking down out of a black sky, and Greta woke in the loft to the smell of smoke and the red glow in the low window, and Caleb's voice roaring up the ladder. "Greta! The lower line! It's a fire, Greta!" She was down the ladder in her nightdress in 10 seconds. Caleb was already saddling throwing tools in a sack, his face lit orange from the glow down the mountain. "Lightning!" she gasped. "No." Caleb hauled the cinch tight. "Storm came early and Pike jumped it. He said it tonight, Greta, 3 days early, 'cause the lightning gave him cover, and he wasn't gonna waste it. It's caught in 4 places along the line already. I can see 4 fires from here." He swung up, and the wind's pushing it straight for the herd. "If it jumps the break we cut, I lose every head I own before sunup." "The cattle. Cattle are bunched in the lower draw. The fool things, they always bunch when they smell smoke. They'll run themselves into the fence and pile up and burn." He wheeled the horse. "I gotta open the far gate and drive 'em up to the high meadow. It's the only ground the fire can't reach. But it's 40 head and 1 man, and they're already panicking." "2, Greta said. "What?" "What? 2 men." She was already running for the corral for the second horse they'd bought a week ago, bareback, no time for a saddle. "It is 40 head and 2 of us. Go, Caleb. Open the far gate. I will drive them to you from behind. Go." And Caleb Rowan looked down at this German woman swinging up bareback on a green horse in her nightdress, with a fire eating his mountain. And he did not argue, because there was no time, and because somewhere in these 2 weeks he had stopped believing there was anything this woman could not do. "High meadow," he shouted, spurring off into the dark. "Drive 'em up the draw, and I'll gate 'em through, and Greta." He twisted back in the saddle. "If it jumps the break, you ride, you hear me. You leave the cattle and you ride for the high ground. Cattle ain't worth your life. You hear me?" "I hear you," Greta called back. She did not mean it. The next hour was the longest of Greta Keller's life. She rode into smoke that stung her eyes blind. She found the herd bunched and screaming in the lower draw exactly as Caleb had said. 40 head of terrified cattle piling against the fence. And she got behind them. This woman who had held cattle only a handful of times, and she drove them the only way she knew. With her whole body, with her voice, with a coiled rope, she swung and cracked, screaming German curses she hadn't spoken since Bremen, because they were the words that came when a body was past its own limit. Hu los ihr verdammten go up go. The cattle would not turn. They wanted the low ground. The way panicked things always want the low ground, and the fire was in the low ground. And Greta hauled her horse across their front again and again, cracking the rope, driving them, and the smoke came down so thick she could not see. The lead animals could only hear them, and once her horse stumbled in a gopher hole and nearly went down, and she stayed on by will alone, by the pure refusal to fall. And then a mini-eternity into it, the herd broke the right way up the draw, some old led cow finally choosing up over the fire, and the rest followed her, the way cattle follow 40. Head thundering up the draw toward the high meadow, and Greta drove them from behind, sobbing, now coughing black, but driving them. She saw the far gate ahead, saw Caleb on his horse holding it open, waving them through his face black with soot, screaming something she couldn't hear. The cattle poured through the gate, 38 of them, 39. She had counted even now. Even here she could not stop her carpenter's mind from counting 39, head through the gate to the high meadow and the safe ground. Too short. Too short, she screamed at Caleb over the roar. There are two behind in the low draw. They turned back. Let 'em go, Caleb screamed. Two head ain't worth it. The fire's in the draw. Greta, let them go. But two head was two head. Two head was the difference maybe between holding the mountain and losing it. Two head was her work, her fence, her nights, and something in Greta Keller that had been forged on a ship in the belly-deep dark could not let a coward's fire take even two head that her hands could save. She wheeled her horse back into the smoke. Greta, no. She rode down into the draw where the fire was. She found them, two young steers tangled in the very fence she had built, caught where the wire had bent, bawling and thrashing, the fire coming up the draw toward them, not 50 yards off, and closing. She came off the horse. She had her father's saw. She always had her father's saw. Now it went where she went, and she went at the wire at the tangle. Sawing, cutting her hands, moving faster than they had ever moved in her life. The heat of the fire on the side of her face, like an open oven door. Come on, she gasped at the steers. Come on, hold still, I have you. The first one came free and bolted up the draw. The second was worse, caught a foreleg through the wire. And the fire was 30 yards, now 20, and Greta could hear the roar of it and feel the wind of it sucking toward the flames. And every sane thing in her screamed to leave the animal and ride. But she thought of her father, told to be grateful for half. And she thought of the doctor, who would not ride up the mountain for a dying woman. And she thought, no one who could save a life should ride away from it. No one. Not ever. Not while I have breath. She sawed through the last strand of wire. The steer wrenched free and ran, and Greta turned to her horse, and the horse was gone. Bolted, terrified, run off up the draw with the cattle, and she was alone on foot in a burning draw with the fire 20 yards away and no way out. Caleb. She ran. She ran up the draw the way the cattle had gone. But the fire had jumped ahead of her on the wind, a tongue of it racing up the dry grass on her flank. And she saw in one terrible instant that it was going to cut her off, that she was not going to make the high ground that she had ridden back for 2 steers, and it was going to cost her everything. And out of the smoke and the fire came a horse at a dead run. Caleb Rowan. He had ridden back down into the fire, down into it, after her. He came alongside her at the gallop without slowing, and his arm came down like the arm of God, and he caught her around the waist and swung her up in front of him in one motion that nearly tore her in half, and the horse never broke stride, and they went up the draw through a wall of heat with the fire licking at the horse's hocks, and Greta buried her face in Caleb's soot-black chest, and held on, and did not scream. And Caleb held her with one arm, and drove that horse up out of the fire, with the other up and up until they burst out over the top of the draw into the high meadow where the air was clean and the stars were out and the cattle stood milling and safe on the good ground. He reined in. The horse stood heaving and shaking under them. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Greta was pressed against him, both his arms around her now, and she could feel his heart slamming against her cheek, and her own, the two of them hammering out of time, and neither let go. You went back, Caleb said. His voice was wrecked, ruined with smoke and something else. You went back into it, for 2 head. You went back? Greta said into his chest, for 1 German. Caleb Rowan made a sound that was half a laugh and half something that broke. Yeah, he said. I reckon I did. And he did not let her go, and she did not want him to. And above them, the whole high meadow spread out clean and safe, with 40 head of cattle standing on it. 40. She had saved them all, every one, all 40. And below them, the fire ate the empty lower range, and found the break they had dug and cut and cleared for 10 days, and stopped. The break held. Everything they had built with their bleeding hands held. It stopped, Greta whispered, watching the fire die against the black line of their break. Caleb, the break. It stopped it. Everything held. You held it, Caleb said. 2 weeks ago there was no break. There was no fence. There was no roof, and there was no second rider, and there was no plan, and I was one broke man on a cursed mountain waitin' to die. He looked down at her, still in the circle of his arms. And then a German carpenter fell off a stagecoach into the mud in Red Hollow. His hand came up black with soot and pushed a strand of scorched hair back from her face so gentle it made her want to weep. And nothing's been the same since, nothing. Greta looked up at him. And there on the high meadow, in the ash and the starlight with 40 saved cattle around them and a coward's fire dying below. Caleb. Rowan lowered his face to hers and stopped a breath away, because he was a man who did not take what wasn't offered, who had said on the first day, I don't touch what ain't mine. Tell me to stop, he said hoarsely, and I'll stop. I'll never say another word of it. You got my word on that, same as any other. Greta Keller reached up, put her soot-black hand against his soot-black jaw, and did not tell him to stop. She kissed him. And every wall the two of them had built around their separate griefs, his 4 years, her whole life, came down at once, quiet, the way a thing comes down, when it has finally found something worth coming down for. They came apart slowly. Caleb pressed his forehead to hers, and they breathed together, and neither of them said anything for a long time, because there was nothing that needed saying. But the world does not let two people rest for long. Riders, Greta said suddenly, going stiff in his arms. Caleb. Below, on the road. Riders coming up, a lot of them with torches. Caleb's head came up. He looked down the mountain. They were coming up the ranch road in a long line, a dozen torches at least more, and Caleb's arm tightened around Greta, and his other hand went to the rifle in the scabbard. That's a mob, he said grimly. Pike's got the whole town believing something. Coming up here in the middle of the night with torches means only one thing. He swung down off the horse and lifted her down beside him. They think the fire's ours. They think we set it. Pike's turned it around on us, a stranger and a cursed man alone on a mountain, and a fire breaks out course, they'll believe it. They already believe every other lie about me. His jaw set. Get behind me, Greta. No, Greta said. Greta, no. She stepped up beside him, not behind him, and there was ash on her face, and fire in her eyes, and her father's saw still in her scorched hand. I did not go back into that fire to hide behind a man now. If they come at both of us, side by side. That is the only way I stand anymore. Caleb looked at her. Side by side, he said. Side by side. The riders came up into the yard, and the torches lit their faces, and at the front of them rode Dawson Pike, and beside him rode the fat gray shape of Sheriff Tull, and behind them half the men of Red Hollow and Silas Boone, and Greta's heart clenched even the preacher Reverend Ames, and near the back on a mule, the thin, frightened face of the girl Ruth. There they are. Pike's voice rang out across the yard, and he pointed a gloved hand at the two of them standing black with soot on the meadow's edge. There's your firebug and her cursed protector. I warned this valley. I warned you all, a foreign woman, and a man the Lord's already marked, and now they've set fire to the whole mountain, and near burned us all in our beds. Sheriff, do your duty. The mob rumbled, torches lifted. Someone shouted, hang 'em, and Sheriff Tull heeled his horse forward, and drew his pistol, and looked at Caleb Rowan and Greta Keller standing side by side, and black with the very fire they'd nearly died fighting, and he said the words that Pike had bought and paid for. Caleb Rowan, Greta Keller, you're both under arrest for arson and for endangering the lives of every soul in Red Hollow. Come down off that meadow, now. Hands where I can see 'em." And Greta Keller, standing beside the man she loved, black with the ash of the fire she had ridden into to save his herd, looked out at the torchlit faces of the town that had thrown her in the mud and lifted her chin and did not move. "Hands where I can see 'em," Sheriff Tull said again. "I won't ask a third time." Caleb raised his hands slow. Greta did not. "You want to arrest us for arson?" Greta said. Her voice carried across the torchlit yard, steady and hard-cornered and strange in that place. "Then look at us, Sheriff. Look at our hands." "I said hands up, woman. Look at them." Greta held her scorched hands out into the torchlight, palms up, and they were blistered and blackened and cut, ash worked into the split skin. "These are not the hands of a person who set a fire. These are the hands of a person who fought one. Ask yourself, Sheriff, when a person sets a barn afire for spite, do they ride into the flames after? Do they come out burned? Or do they stand back on the road with a torch safe and clean and watch?" Her eyes went to Pike, to his gloved, unmarked hands on his clean reins. "Whose hands are burned tonight, Sheriff? Mine, not his." A murmur moved through the mob. Tull's eyes flicked just once to Pike's hands. "Don't listen to the witch," Pike said quickly. "She'd say anything. Foreigners lie like they breathe." "There are 39 head of cattle standing on this meadow behind me," Greta cut across him, "and one more that ran off in the dark, and every one of them living because I drove them up out of the fire. A firebug does not save the cattle, Mr. Pike. A firebug does not lose her horse in the flames, saving 2 steers caught in a fence. You want to know who set this fire? Ask who profits from it. Ask who has offered to buy this mountain 3 summers running. Ask who wrote—" "That's enough!" Pike's voice cracked like a whip. His horse sidestepped. "Sheriff, arrest them, or I'll have my men do it, right now." And that the crack in his voice, the fear under the fury, that was the thing the mob heard. Torchlight is honest that way. It showed them a rich man frightened of a burned woman's words, and men are slow, but they are not always stupid, and a few of them went quiet and thoughtful in a way that frightened Pike more than any argument. "Caleb Rowan didn't set no fire." The voice came from the back of the crowd, thin, young, a girl's, every head turned. Ruth Pruitt heeled her mule forward through the riders, pale as milk, shaking, but coming, and her Aunt Ada's voice hissed, "Ruth, get back here," and Ruth did not get back. "I said Caleb Rowan didn't set it," Ruth said louder. "And neither did Miss Keller, and I can prove it, because I know who did." "Girl, you don't know a thing," Pike started. "I know Cole Dawkins," Ruth said, and her voice broke and steadied. "I know him because we've been sweethearts since we were 14, and everybody in this valley knows it, but pretends they don't, 'cause his family's poor. And 3 nights ago, Cole came to my window in the dark, beat half to death, with 2 of Mr. Pike's men behind him, and Mr. Pike's men told him to get on a horse and ride to Texas and never come back, or they'd burn his mama's farm with her in it." Tears ran down her face, but her voice held. "And before they dragged him off, Cole told me the whole thing. That Mr. Pike made him cut Rowan's fence. That there was a plan to burn the lower range and blame the sky. That Mr. Pike had it all wrote down in a book. A paybook, Cole called it. With the names of every man, and the date, and the money." The yard went dead silent. Greta felt Caleb go still as stone beside her. "He's writing lies into a stupid girl's mouth," Pike said, but his voice had climbed thin now high. "Sheriff, she's a child in love with a criminal. She'd say anything." "July 24th, Ruth said. Pike stopped. "Cole said the date in the book was July 24th, Ruth said into the silence. "But then the storm came early 3 nights past, and Mr. Pike couldn't wait, so he moved it up. That's why the fire came tonight, and not on the 24th like the book says. Now how?" She looked around at the torchlit faces, at her aunt, at the sheriff, at the whole town. "How would I know a date that's still 3 days off, that's wrote in a book none of us has ever seen, unless somebody who saw the book told me? How, Mr. Pike, you explain that to these people. Explain how a girl on a mule knows the date in your book." Nobody moved. And Greta Keller, who had planned for 8 days to break into a house and steal a ledger, she could not prove existed, understood in one shining instant that she did not need to. Because the ledger had just been proven to exist out loud, in front of the whole town, by a frightened girl on a mule. And the only man who could prove it didn't exist was Dawson Pike, and he had just gone the color of ash. "Sheriff Tull," Greta said quietly, "you are a bought man. Everyone here knows it. But you are not, I think, a stupid one, so think. In 1 hour, when the sun comes up, there will be 40 head of cattle standing saved on this meadow, and a fire break dug 10 days deep that stopped the flames dead, and 2 people burned to the bone from fighting it. And there will be a girl who knew a date from a book she never saw. And there will be a rich man with clean gloves who cannot explain any of it." She took 1 step forward. "Now, you can arrest us tonight on that man's word. And in a month when a federal marshal comes through, and one will come, Sheriff, because I will write to Helena myself, and to the territorial governor, and I will send them Ruth's testimony and the map we found, and a drawing of your face standing here. You can explain to him why you arrested the 2 people who put the fire out and let the man who set it ride home. Or," she let it hang, "you can do the other thing." Sheriff Tull sat very still on his horse. His pistol was still up, but it had drifted somewhere in the last minute until it no longer pointed quite at Caleb. "What map?" he said slowly. That was the crack that broke the dam. Caleb went into the house and came back with the canvas satchel, Cole Dawkins's satchel, dropped in the tack room the night he was taken, and he pulled out the map and held it up in the torchlight, and even at a distance, the mob could see it. Caleb's range, his fence, the marks along the lower line where the brush stood thickest, and the date in a cramped hand. July 24th. "Boy dropped this the night Pike's men pulled him out my tack room window," Caleb said, and his voice carried flat and true across the yard. "Same night Ruth's telling you about. I brought it to you 6 days ago, Sheriff, in your office, and you told me a boy could have drawn it and sent me home." He lowered the map. "Reckon it don't look like a boy drew it now. Not with a girl swearing to the very date that's on it who never laid eyes on it in her life. Let me see that." Tull heeled his horse forward and took the map. He looked at it a long time. And Greta watched a bought man do arithmetic in his head, watched him weigh Dawson Pike's money against a federal marshal, and a hanging offense, and a whole town of witnesses who had just heard a girl name a date, and watched in real time the arithmetic come out the other way. "That's my land drawn there, Dawson," Tull said slowly, not looking up from the map. "Your neighbor's land, marked for burning, in a hand that looks a mighty lot like," he turned the map well, "like a bookkeeper's hand. A man who's used to writing careful. A man who keeps books." "Bill," Pike's voice had gone soft and dangerous. "Bill Tull, you want to think real hard about your next move. You remember who holds the note on your brother's freight line. You remember who put you in that badge." And there it was said out loud in front of the whole town. The threat. The proof of the ownership. Pike, rattled past his own cunning, had just confessed the leash in front of 40 witnesses. The murmur in the crowd rose to something uglier now, and it was not aimed at Caleb and Greta anymore. "You hear that, Silas Boone of all people?" Silas Boone, who had put Greta in the mud, said it loud and startled. "He just told the sheriff he owns him. Right out. He owns the badge." Silas looked genuinely offended, the way a small man is offended to learn he's been small in someone else's game. "Hell, Dawson, you own my brother's freight note too. That why my hauling rates went up in April, that you're doing. Everybody's rates went up. Someone else called. Bank raised 'em all in April. The bank's Pike," a third voice said. "The bank's always been Pike." The torchlight mob which had come up the mountain to hang a foreign woman was turning in front of Greta's eyes into something else. A crowd of men who were realizing one by one in the ugly, honest light of their own torches that the fire on the mountain, and the notes on their farms, and the rates at the bank were all the same hand, and that the hand was not Caleb Rowan's. Pike saw it too. "Enough," he said, and his hand went to his coat. "Pike's got a gun." Caleb moved faster than Greta had ever seen him move. He shoved her down and behind the horse, and came up with his rifle already at his shoulder, and his voice cut across the yard like the crack of the fire itself. "Don't." Just the one word. "Don't you clear that coat, Dawson. You draw on me in front of the whole town, and 40 men'll swear they watched you do it, and then it won't matter who owns the sheriff. Take your hand away from your coat." For one long, terrible heartbeat, nobody breathed. Dawson Pike, 4,000 acres and 15 hands, and a bought sheriff, and a whole valley in debt to him, sat on his horse in the torchlight, with his hand inside his coat, and Caleb Rowan's rifle steady on his chest, and 40 of his own neighbors watching, and he understood at last that the arithmetic had turned all the way over, and that there was no number of acres that could carry him out of this yard. He took his hand away from his coat. "Sheriff," Caleb said, rifle never wavering, "your prisoner's the one with the clean gloves, not the two of us with the burned hands. You gonna do your job, or you want to explain to the marshal why you didn't?" Bill Tull sat there with the map in one hand and his pistol in the other at the exact center of his life, and he made his choice. He turned his pistol on Dawson Pike. "Dawson Pike," Tull said, and his voice shook only a little. "You're under arrest, arson, and attempted murder, and—" He swallowed, and God knows what all else once a marshal opens your books. He looked almost sick with it, a man cutting off his own leg to save his life. "Boys, take his gun, and somebody ride down and open the jail." Pike's own men did not move to defend him. That was the moment it was truly over, when Pike looked to his hired guns, and his hired guns looked at 40 angry neighbors, and a sheriff's drawn pistol, and a rifle in Caleb Rowan's steady hands, and did the arithmetic themselves, and stayed where they were. A bought man is only bought as long as the buying holds. The buying had just stopped holding. They took Dawson Pike off his horse. He did not go easy, but he went. It should have ended there. But there was one more thing, and it was the thing that mattered most, and it came from the last person Greta expected. Ada Pruitt got down off the church wagon. She crossed the yard in her black bombazine through the torchlight and the ash, and she stopped in front of Greta Keller. Greta Black, with soot, blistered, swaying now on her feet as the long night finally caught up with her, and the whole town watched the two women face each other. The one who had driven a wagon up a mountain to offer a kitchen and the one who had refused it. For a long moment, Ada Pruitt said nothing. Her jaw worked. She was not a woman built to bend, and Greta could see what the bending cost her. "I stood on a porch in Red Hollow," Ada said finally low, so that only the nearest could hear. "And I watched Silas Boone put you in the mud, and I did not move." Her voice was stone, but something behind it had cracked. "And 4 years ago, I stood in that same town, and I did not ride up this mountain when Sarah Rowan was dying, because the road was bad, and it was cold, and it was easier not to. And I have called this man cursed for 4 years to keep from calling myself a coward." She stopped. Her chin trembled once and went still. "My niece just did the brave thing I have never once done in my life, in front of everyone, on a mule." She looked at Ruth, then back at Greta, and her old hard eyes were wet. "I do not know how to say I was wrong, Miss Keller. I have never learned the words, but I brought a wagon, and it's full of nails and feed and timber and every jar of preserves in my cellar. I loaded it to shame you off this mountain." She drew a breath. "I'd like to unload it to help you keep it, if you'll let an old fool do that much." Greta Keller looked at this woman who had been her enemy since the first hour in the street. And her father's voice came to her across the ocean, and the years a town does not hate the man it wronged. It hates that he reminds it of the wrong. She understood standing there that Ada Pruitt had carried her own weight all these years, the same as Caleb had carried his, and that the offer in front of her now was the sound of that weight at long last being set down. "My father," Greta said quietly, "was cheated of his pay and told to be grateful for half. He died believing the world takes from honest hands and gives nothing back." She held out her own honest hand, blistered and black, to the old woman. "You have just proved him wrong, Mrs. Pruitt, on a mountain in America at the end of a long night. Unload your wagon, and thank you. Not for the nails." Her voice caught. "For the words. They were harder than the nails, and you found them. That counts for more than you know." Ada Pruitt took the burned hand in both of hers, and the hard old woman in black bombazine bowed her gray head over a German carpenter's ruined fingers and did not let go for a long moment, and when she lifted her head, Her face had changed years off it. Somehow the way a face changes when a thing set down at last stops being carried. The sun came up on Caleb Rowan's mountain, and it came up on a changed world. They found the 40th head of cattle at dawn, Greta's lost steer, standing sheepish and singed at the top of the draw, and when Caleb counted 40 on the high meadow, he looked at Greta and shook his head. 40, he said. Not 39, 40. You saved every last one, and then the last one saved itself, just to spite the arithmetic. It is a stubborn animal, Greta said. I like it. We will keep it. We, Caleb said. Greta went very still. She had not meant to say it. It had just come out the way true things do when a person is too tired to guard them. I only meant... I know what you meant, Caleb said quietly. The town did not go back down the mountain that morning. That was the thing Greta would remember. They stayed. Silas Boone. Silas Boone, who had flicked her bonnet and shoved her into the mud, climbed up onto the barn roof and started nailing sheathing to the rafters. She'd trued clumsy, but willing, and when she climbed up to correct his work, he took the correction from a woman without one word of complaint, because a man who has watched that same woman drive 40 head out of a fire does not have much left to say about who should hold a hammer. The preacher, Reverend Ames, mended the corral gate. Ruth and 2 other girls hauled water and fed the cattle. Ada Pruitt organized the whole thing from the yard like a general, and by noon the ranch that had been half-broken and cursed and alone was full of the sound of a town at work. Greta stood in the yard in the middle of it all, swaying with exhaustion, and Caleb came and stood beside her, and they watched their enemies mend their ranch. Your father, Caleb said. The one who died believin' the world takes from honest hands. Yes, he was wrong about America, Caleb said. But he was right about one thing, a thing that's hard to hold. He looked at the mountain, at the high meadow, at the 40 head of cattle, and the town at work, and the woman beside him is a thing worth holdin'. He was quiet a moment. Sarah used to say that, word for word. I never thought I'd hear it be true a second time. Greta looked up at him. You do not have to say her name carefully around me, she said. Sarah, she is part of this mountain. She saw the high grass before anyone. I would have liked her, I think. She had good judgment, she chose you. A tired, crooked, almost smile. Bad taste in easy country, good taste in men. Caleb Rowan laughed, a real laugh from the belly cracked with smoke and exhaustion, the sound of 4 years of grief finally finding the room to move, and it was the best sound Greta had heard in her whole life on either side of the ocean. That evening, when the town had finally gone back down the mountain and the ranch stood quiet, Greta climbed the ladder to the loft room to sleep, and she stopped at the top. Someone had been in her room, not to take anything, to give. The window that had been small and cracked was gone, and in its place, Caleb had cut and framed a proper window-wide true. The sash squared and plumbed the very joinery she herself would have done, and it faced north out toward the ridge and the high meadow and the mountains standing blue in the last light. He had built it while she slept off the fire that afternoon. She could see his work in it, careful and honest, a little rough where hers would have been fine but plumb. True. And on the workbench beneath it beside her father's saw sat a tin cup of coffee gone cold now. Left there hours ago by a man who did not know how to say a thing out loud, and so had said it the only way he knew. A repaired window. A cup of coffee. Silent help. Greta stood in the doorway and understood all at once and completely everything Caleb Rowan had never once said to her in words. She went to the window and put her blistered hand flat against the true squared frame he had built for her. And she looked out at the ridge going gold, and for the first time since Bremen, for the first time since she had stood over her father's grave, and sold everything but his tools, and crossed an ocean into the belly-deep dark, Greta Keller did not feel alone. Behind her in the doorway a floorboard creaked. She did not turn around. You built me a window, she said. Old one didn't face the ridge right, Caleb said. Figured you'd want to see the meadow, where the cattle are. A pause. Your cattle. You saved 'em. Man ought to be able to see what he saved. And the coffee? Another pause. Longer. Coffee's just coffee, Caleb said gruffly. Greta turned around then. And she looked at this tall, quiet, weathered mountain cowboy standing in her doorway with his hat in his hands. This man who had come down the middle of a street to pick her father's saw up out of the mud, who had ridden into a fire for one German who could not say a single word of what was in him, and so had cut her a window to the ridge and left cold coffee on her bench, and Greta Keller, who read hands the way other women read faces, read his at last, all the way to the bottom. "No, Caleb," she said softly. "Coffee is not just coffee. Not from you. I know your language now. You do not speak it with your mouth. You speak it with your hands." She crossed the small room to him. A window, a plate of beans on the first night, an arm that came down out of the fire and would not let me burn. She stopped in front of him. "You have been telling me something for 2 weeks, Caleb Rowan, in every board you cut and every gate you held, and I have heard every word of it." Caleb stood there with his hat in his hands and could not speak. He started and stopped, and his jaw worked the way it did when the thing was too big for the words. "Greta, I ain't got the—" "I know," Greta said. "You do not have the words. You have never had the words. So let me have them for both of us this once." She reached up and took his rough face in her burned hands. "I am not going to Bozeman. I am not getting on the stage on Thursday. I am staying on this mountain with you, and we are going to hold this hard thing together, because it is worth holding, and because—" Her own voice broke now, the first crack in her all night, "because I crossed an ocean, looking for a place where honest hands are paid for the work. And I did not find a place, Caleb. I found you, and that is better." And Caleb Rowan dropped his hat and pulled her in and held her against him in the loft room with the true squared window facing the ridge, and outside the last gold light fell across the high meadow where 40 head of cattle stood safe on the good ground, and neither of them said another word, because they did not need to. They had both at last come home. Thursday came, and the stagecoach left Red Hollow without Greta Keller on it. She did not go down to watch it go. She was on the barn roof at dawn, laying the last course of sheathing over the rafters she'd trued 3 weeks before, and when the far-off rattle of the coach carried up the mountain, she only paused hammer in hand and looked north toward the ridge for a moment, and then went back to work. Caleb watched her from the yard. "That's the Thursday coach," he called up. "The one you had a seat on." "I know which coach it is." "Last one till next week." "I know that too." Greta drove a nail. "Are you asking me something, Caleb Rowan, or are you just afraid I forgot the days?" Caleb almost smiled. "Just making sure you heard it leave." "I heard it." She sat back on her heels on the roof and looked down at him, and there was ash long washed off her now, but the burns still healing pink on her hands. "It left without me. It will leave without me every Thursday from now until I am an old woman on this mountain. Does that answer the thing you were not asking?" "Reckon it does," Caleb said, and he stood there in the yard a moment longer than he needed to, just looking up at the woman on his roof before he went back to the water line. The federal marshal came 11 days later. His name was Coburn, and he rode up from Helena with 2 deputies and a saddlebag full of paper, and he had come because a German carpenter had written 3 letters, one to the territorial governor, one to the U.S. Marshal's office, and one to a newspaper in Helena, and had enclosed in each a careful drawing of a hand-marked map, a sworn statement from a girl named Ruth Pruitt, and a plain accounting in a plain bookkeeper's hand of exactly how one man had come to own a valley. "You Greta Keller," Coburn said, swinging down in the yard. "I am." "You write like a lawyer, ma'am." He pulled her letters from his coat. 3 counties worth of trouble in this envelope, all of it laid out so plain a blind man could follow it. Dates, names, the note on the Dawkins farm, the rates the bank raised in April. "I've opened investigations off less than half of this." He looked at her a beat longer. "Where'd you learn to build a case?" "I did not learn to build a case," Greta said. "I learned to build a staircase. It is the same thing. You find where the pieces meet, and you make them true, and you do not skip a joint because it does not show. A crooked joint that does not show is the one that brings the whole thing down." She wiped her hands. Dawson Pike skipped his joints. He thought the parts that did not show would hold. They never do. Marshal Coburn looked at her a long moment. And then he did a thing that no man in that valley had done to Greta Keller since she stepped off the coach into the mud. He took off his hat to her. "Ma'am," he said, "I've served 15 years in this territory, and I've met exactly 3 people I'd trust to lay a thing out straight and let the truth fall where it falls." He put the hat back on. "You're the 3rd. Now, let's go to town and open Dawson Pike's books, and let's see how deep this rot runs." It ran deep. Pike's ledger, the paybook, the one Cole Dawkins had named, and Ruth had sworn to, and Greta had planned for 8 days to steal, and never had to, was found exactly where Greta had said a frightened rich man would keep his most dangerous paper. In his office. On his own land. In a locked drawer close where no clerk could read it. And in it, in Pike's own careful hand, was every man he'd paid to cut a fence, or move a cow, or frighten a farmer, and the wage for each and the dates. July 24th. There it was, 3 days after the fire he could not wait for. And a dozen other dates going back 3 years. And a column of names that read like a confession, because half of them were men who now faced with a federal marshal and their own signatures beside Pike's, told the whole truth to save their own necks. Cole Dawkins was one of them. They found him in Texas, where Pike's men had run him, and he came back of his own will, when Ruth wrote to him that Pike was in a cell, and the marshal was federal, and no banknote could reach him now. He walked into Coburn's makeshift court white-faced and shaking the same boy who had put a knife on Greta in the dark, and he stood in front of the whole town and told all of it, the note on his mother's farm, the threats, the fence he cut with a knife in his teeth, the fire he was meant to help set, and when he was done, he turned, and he found Greta Keller in the crowd, and he said the thing he had come all the way from Texas to say. "Miss Keller, I put a knife on you, in the dark, in your night clothes." His voice cracked to pieces. "There ain't no making that right. But I rode 2,000 miles to say it to your face, 'cause a coward runs and I'm done being one. I'm sorry, ma'am, for all of it." The town watched to see what the German woman would do. Greta looked at the boy. The frightened boy, with a note on his mother's farm. The one she had decided even that terrible night was a different thing than a monster. "Cole Dawkins," she said, "you were a coward once in the dark with a knife, and you have been brave once in the daylight with the truth. A man is not the worst thing he did when he was afraid. A man is what he does after." She held his eye. "You came 2,000 miles to face the woman you wronged. My father would have shaken your hand for that. So will I." And she held out her healed hand and took his and shook it in front of the whole town, and half the women in Red Hollow wept to see it, and the other half wished they had. Ruth Pruitt married him that autumn. Ada Pruitt gave the bride away because Ruth's own father was long dead, and the old woman in black bombazine stood up in church beside a poor farmer's son she'd once thought beneath her niece, and gave her blessing loud enough for God and the whole valley to hear. Dawson Pike was tried in Helena before a federal judge on his own ledger, and the sworn word of 11 men, and he did not walk out of that courtroom a free man, and the 4,000 acres he had built on debt and fear came apart in the settling of it. His notes were called. His bank was opened. And a strange thing happened in Red Hollow that no one had expected with Pike's hand off the valley's throat. The men he had owned found they could breathe. Silas Boone's freight rates came back down. The Dawkins farm was saved the note bought out at honest terms by the very neighbors who'd once let Pike hold it over the family. The bank got a new man, an honest one, Coburn vouched for, and for the first time in a decade, the arithmetic of Red Hollow ran true. And the town remembered slowly at first with shame and then with something warmer, exactly who had made that possible. It was not a grand thing. There was no parade. It was 100 small things over a season. It was Silas Boone riding up the mountain one morning with a load of lumber he'd hauled for free, and standing in the yard turning his hat in his hands and saying, "Miss Keller, I put you in the mud that first day. I laughed while I done it. And you drove 40 head out of a fire that near took the whole valley, mine included." He couldn't quite meet her eye. "Man like me don't have pretty words, but I brung you my best oak seasoned 3 years, and I'll haul you whatever you need from now on and won't take a dime for it, and that's the only apology I know how to make." "That is the only apology worth making," Greta said. "Words are cheap, Mr. Boone. Seasoned oak is dear. I take your meaning. Unload it by the barn." And Silas Boone, who had shoved a lone woman into the dirt for sport on the first day, unloaded his best oak by her barn, and it was the finest apology anyone in that valley ever gave because it was made with the hands. By the end of that first summer, the thing that Greta Keller had come to America to find had grown into something she had never dared imagine. It started with the church. Reverend Ames came up the mountain in September hat in hand and asked humbly a man who had once stood by while a town called Caleb cursed whether the German carpenter who had forged wheat-shaped hinges for St. Ansgar's in Bremen might consider building a proper door for the little church in Red Hollow, whose own door had sagged on rotten hinges for 15 years. Greta built the door. She forged the hinges herself in Caleb's barn, at a fire they built together, and she shaped them like wheat, the way she had for the church across the ocean. Because her father had taught her that a door is a prayer. A person walks through, and it ought to be made beautiful. The whole town came to see it hung, and when they saw it, the true squared oak, the iron wheat curling up the hinges, the joinery so fine you could not find a seam, something happened in Red Hollow that finished what the fire had started. Word went out. A German carpenter up on Rowan's Mountain who could build a thing like that. And they came, from the next valley and the next county. A rancher who wanted a barn that would stand. A widow who wanted a staircase. A storekeeper who wanted a counter. A schoolmaster who wanted desks. A family who wanted a house that would hold 300 years the way her father had built houses to hold. Greta hired the Dawkins boy's younger brother first. Then 2 more. Then a girl of 14 with no brothers and a father who had no sons. And Greta looked at that girl and saw herself at 9 years old with a chisel in her hand and took her on without a word and taught her the way her own father had taught her. God does not care whose hands do the work, only that it is done true. Within 3 years, there was a workshop below the ranch with 6 hands in it, and Greta Keller's mark burned into every piece that left it. A small mark, a stalk of wheat, the same as the hinges, and that mark came to mean in that corner of Montana a thing that would not fail, a thing built honest, a thing that would outlast the hand that made it. The town that had thrown her in the mud now spoke her name with pride, as if they had always known, as if they had not laughed on a porch on a brutal summer afternoon. And Greta let them. Her father's voice again a town does not hate the man it wronged. It hates the reminder. She would not be their reminder any longer. She would be their carpenter. It was the better thing to be and the more useful, and she had never in her life had much patience for grudges when there was work to be done. Caleb's cattle throve on the high grass, summer after summer, and the mountain that Sarah Rowan had seen with her clear eyes before anyone became the best-known outfit in the valley, Rowan beef off the high meadow, the sweetest grass in the territory. And when men asked Caleb how he'd turned it around, how a cursed man alone had built all this, Caleb Rowan would tip his hat toward the workshop below the barn, where the sound of saws and hammers carried up the mountain, and he'd say the truest 4 words he knew. I didn't. She did. They married in the church under the door she'd built in the 2nd summer. It was not a large wedding. Ada Pruitt organized it, of course, because someone had to, and she wept the whole way through it and pretended it was dust. Ruth stood up beside Greta, round with her first child. Cole stood up beside Caleb. Marshall Coburn rode all the way up from Helena, because he said a man ought to see a thing come out right at least once in his life, and this was the once. Silas Boone gave the seasoned oak that made the wedding table and asked shyly if he might sit at it, and was told yes. Caleb Rowan, who had never had the words, found 4 of them at the altar. I got no speech, he said, standing under the wheat-hinged door with his hat off and his hands for once still. Everybody here knows I never did. Greta knows it best of all. He looked at her. So, I'll just say the thing I've been saying the only way I knew how for 2 years, in a plate of beans, in a window facing the ridge, in a cup of coffee left on a bench. His voice went rough. I love you, Greta Keller. There's the words, finally. Took me long enough. But I reckon you already knew. I already knew, Greta said, and she was crying now, this woman who did not cry, who had not cried since Bremen. I have known since the coffee, but it is good to hear the words Caleb. A person should hear them once out loud, even when they read hands as well as I do. And he kissed her under the door she'd built, and the whole town of Red Hollow, the town that had laughed, the town that had thrown her down, the town that had come up the mountain with torches to hang her and come back down converted. The whole town of Red Hollow stood up and cheered. Years passed on the mountain the way years do in seasons of grass and snow and the sound of saws. The workshop grew. Greta's mark spread through 3 counties and then beyond. And there came a day when a man from as far as Denver rode up the mountain to commission a staircase, the kind that turns. He said he'd heard she built the kind that turns, and Greta built it, and it turned, and it was the finest thing she ever made, and she thought of her father the whole time she made it. She had children, 2 boys and a girl, and she put a chisel in every one of their hands as soon as they could hold it, sons and daughter alike, and told them what her father had told her. And it was true in her mouth as it had been true in his. God does not care whose hands do the work. The girl was the best of the 3. Of course she was. And on an evening late in her life, an evening when her hair had gone gray, and her hands were seamed and scarred and slower than they'd been, but still true. Still plumb. Greta Keller sat with Caleb Rowan on the ridge above the ranch, where they had sat on the first night, the 2 of them watching the last gold light fall across the valley. Below them, the workshop was quiet for the day. The high meadow was green with the best grass in the territory. The barn she had roofed a lifetime ago still stood true and tight. Not one board sprung in all the years, and beyond it the fences ran plumb to the horizon, and the town of Red Hollow sat small and golden in the distance, a town that had learned at long last and the hard way that worth is not given by the powerful, but built by honest hands. "You cold?" Caleb asked. He was old now, too weathered down to leather and iron, but his voice was the same low, slow water it had always been. "I'll fetch a blanket." "I am not cold." "Sarah used to get cold up here of an evening." "I am not Sarah," Greta said gently. "And I do not get cold. But it is good that you say her name. She should be set up here. She saw the grass first." She reached over and took his old hand in her old hand. The 2 of them scarred the same, now a lifetime of the same work worn into both. She would be glad, I think, that the mountain held, that someone came who could hold it with you. "She'd have liked you," Caleb said. "I've thought that 1,000 times. She'd have handed you a hammer the first day same as I did, and the 2 of you'd have ganged up on me inside a week." Greta laughed, the low, easy laugh of an old woman who has lived a full life and cheated no one and been cheated in the end by nobody. They sat a while in the gold light, and Greta Keller looked out over all of it, the ranch, the workshop, the mark on every honest piece for 100 miles, the children with chisels in their hands, the town that spoke her name now with pride, the whole empire that had grown from a broken barn roof and a cup of cold coffee, and one man who had come down the middle of a street to pick her father's saw up out of the mud. And she thought of the girl who had stood in that mud on a brutal summer afternoon bleeding and laughed at foreign and alone with nothing in all the world but a trunk full of tools and a father's voice in her ear. She thought, "They laughed at me. The whole town laughed." And she thought, "Let them remember now who built the door they walk through to pray. Let them remember who roofed the barn and mended the fence and drove the fire back off this mountain. Let them remember that they threw a foreign girl in the dirt, and that she rose and picked up her hammer and built all of this with her own 2 hands, and asked no one's leave to do it." The last light went gold, then rose, then dim. "Caleb," Greta said, when I stepped off that coach into the mud and Silas Boone laughed and no one would help me up." She squeezed his old hand. "I thought I had come to the end of the world. I thought America was a lie the same as everywhere. I thought I would die a stranger cheated of everything the way my father died." She turned and looked at him. This man she had built a life beside this mountain she had built a life upon. "And instead I built this, all of it, not because the world gave it to me. The world gave me mud. I built it because I would not lie down in the mud. Because a person's worth is not what a town decides on a porch. It is what her hands make true, whether the town is watching or not." Caleb Rowan looked at his wife, gray-haired and iron-spined and dearer to him than the mountain itself, and he said, the last thing, the truest thing, the thing that was the whole of it. "You didn't just build a ranch, Greta," he said, "and you didn't just build a workshop or a door or a staircase that turns. You built something this whole valley needed and didn't have till you fell off that coach." He looked out at the gold light dying over the empire her hands had made. "You built proof. Proof that it don't matter where a soul comes from, or whether they got people, or whether the powerful ones laugh. Proof that honest hands, that won't lie down, and won't be cheated, and won't ask leave, those hands can build anything. Even out of mud. Especially out of mud." Greta Keller looked out over the mountain in the last of the light, and she knew that it was true. She had come with nothing but her father's tools and a father's faith that honest work was worth something somewhere in some country across the sea. She had been proven right, and a woman who builds her worth with her own 2 hands in defiance of every soul who ever laughed at her in the mud, builds a thing that no town, no baron, no fire, and no lie can ever take from her, because it was never given to her in the first place. She built it. It was hers, and it would stand 300 years.